So, hello, and welcome to part three of the demand module. And today we'll be talking about shifts in demand. And our picture for today, our background for today, is Battle Creek, Michigan. And Battle Creek, Michigan is known as the cereal city, okay? Mainly because this is where the big cereal companies, so think about Kellogg's, Post, General Mills, most of them had their start here in Battle Creek, Michigan. And we'll be talking about cereal today because we'll be continuing on using our example of cow's milk as a analysis. And today we'll be looking at other things aside from price that can make that has an influence on demand. So let's begin. Let's begin with a recap. So last time we talked about the demand function, and we said that the quantity of milk that is bought in the store or a family demands depends on several factors. So you've got price of the milk, you've got the income of family members, and so on and so forth, and you've got this whole list over here. And we'll be talking about this one by one. Now, again, because it's a function, we can put this mathematically as the quantity of milk bought is equals to is a function that just means depends on these factors. And last time we talked about the effect of changing the price of the good, and we came up with the law of demand. And what the law of demand basically says as is that the higher the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. And basically there's an inverse relationship. And again, if we increase price, quantity demanded goes down. Decrease price, we increase the quantity demanded. Okay? And we also did this graphically through what we call the demand curve. So this is a demand curve is where you've got price on the y-axis and quantity demanded on the x-axis. And as you can see again, the law of demand states that as we increase the price, so we increase the price, we go up here, the quantity demanded goes down. Basically, you've got a graph that is downward sloping. So that's what the law of demand basically states. So today we'll be dealing with what we call non-price factors, basically everything else here that is not related to price. And now, this is just a warning, a caveat. When we say non-price factors, we mean everything else that is not the price of the good itself. Okay, so in our case studies, we'll be dealing with milk. So all of the factors that do not have anything to do with the price of milk itself. Now, we can still talk about other things that have a price, for example, like cereals and all of that. Mainly because that's a complement. That's not actually the price of milk itself, but that is also something that does affect demand. That is not a price of milk itself. So when you talk about non-price factors, just again, it doesn't mean we're not talking about price. It just means we're not talking about the price of the good we are analyzing. We could talk about the price of other goods that may affect the demand of milk, for example. But all of that will be under non-price factors as long as we don't think about the price of milk. Okay, so that's the question. What happens to quantity demanded if we increase or decrease these other factors? And again, we'll be taking the ceteris paribus approach, meaning all else being equal. So we'll take one factor at a time and analyze their effects. Okay, so we'll start first with income. So let's go back to a case study of cow's milk. And once again, we introduced Ellie from before, and we'll be using her again as a case study. So what happens when we change Ellie's budget? Let's just have a review of what the setup was before. So this is Ellie, and the price of milk was 2 pieces of money. Okay, and Ellie's budget before was about 6 money. Okay, and if you do the maths, Ellie could buy 6 divided by 2, 3 pieces of milk. Okay, now what happens if we change Ellie's budget? So for example, Ellie's budget 6, let's say she has 2 extra monies for the shopping trip. Well, if assuming milk is the only good that we have, we could expect now that there's 8 money divided by 2, Ellie can now buy 4 pieces of milk or 4 cartons of milk because now she has more money to spend, right? So we can see here that as we increase the budget or the income, okay, so remember budget and income. Income is just the amount of money that you receive, right? So it's similar to a budget. As we increase the income of a person, we also see that the amount of milk bought increases. All right, I hope that's straightforward enough. So now the question is, how do we represent this? So last time we saw how we represented what happens when you change the price of milk itself, right? Which led us to the demand curve. And so what about non-price factors? How do you represent this? Well, I'll show you two ways to do it. And then I'll show you the first way is a straightforward way of doing it. The second way is actually how we actually do it when it comes to economics. Right. So the first one is basically just comparing the quantity demanded with the income directly. It's very simple, right? You've got quantity demanded on, again, the x-axis, because that's what we're used to. Basically, quantity demand is always on the x-axis. Again, that wasn't a thing for me. It was just something that they decided to come up. And we put income now on the y-axis. So there's one way we could represent it. It's very straightforward, right? We've got an income, we've got quantity demanded based on the income, and then we could just think, oh, I could just graph that straight up, just like price. So we graphed that there, and you can see points just lie in a straight line because I've just chosen the points to be that way, and we can join the lines by a curve. Simple. Now, this is a very straightforward way of doing it. However, this is not how we usually do it in economics, mainly because we prefer to see the law of demand in action. So meaning we still have the price and all of that. Okay, so we'll move on to approach 2, and this is how we usually do it. Okay, so this is a simple way to do it. This is not the standard way of doing things. So this is the standard way of doing things. So approach 2 is we use a demand curve. So let's have a recap first again. What's a demand curve again? And again, it's just the quantity demanded on the y-axis and the x-axis, and the price on the y-axis. And again, because of the law of demand states that as we increase price, quantity demanded goes down, we have a downward sloping curve. Right? I hope that's clear. So we'll consider Lee's demand curve for cow's milk first. All right, we'll just consider that as a straightforward thing. So before, and this is from this is a random demand curve that I drew up. Let's say this is for when she had, a certain budget. All right. So what happens now is, remember, this doesn't have income yet. This is all just price of milk and quantity demanded, right? There's no income here yet. So we'll see now what happens when you change incomes. So let's consider 1 point, okay? Let's look at what happens if we increase Ellie's budget. So let's consider 1 point. So let's say if the price is free money, we could buy 3 jugs of quantity of pieces of milk, okay? So she could buy 2 milk if the price was 3 money each. Now, if we increase her budget, right, for the same price, she could now buy, let's 1 extra piece of milk, right? Let's say she could do that. So now, because again, if we increase the income or the budget, she could now buy more for the same price. So let's take another point again. Now let's say the price was 2. Now if the price is 2, you could buy 3 again. Now if we increase the budget, you could buy more. And if we do that for each separate point, what happens now is we can draw a new demand curve. All right. So that's a new demand curve when we increase Ellie's budget, and that's this. The gray one here is the old demand curve from before we increased her budget. So in economic terms, we say that the demand curve shifted to the right. Okay, and so this is a very important concept in economics, the shifting of the demand curve. And we'll have this again when we get to supply. But for now, when we talk about demand, non-price factors, okay, we usually use the demand curve, which is again price against quantity demanded, and then anything that's non-price, we just look at what happens to the demand curve if we change certain factors. All right. So there's 2 ways of looking at things now. There's 2 things that could change the demand. There's movement and there's shift. And I will show this to you later, but for now, here's some notey bits. So when we say movement along the demand curve, this takes place when there is a change in price, which usually causes a change in quantity demanded. And shift of the demand curve takes place when a non-price factor changes, causing a change in the entire demand curve. We say that demand changes. So just to summarize this, when we say movement along the demand curve, movement is only caused by a change in price. Everything else is a shift, will cause a shift of the demand curve. All right, and that's what it is. And let me show this to you through an animation. Oh yes, and just another caveat. Remember, non-price can also include changes in the price of other goods. I've mentioned that before, and I'll mention that again. If we say when I say non-price goods, non-price factors, it just means not the price of milk. It could mean it could include the price of cereal, it could include the price of other substitutes, as long as it's not the price of cow's milk that we're talking about. Okay, I hope that's clear. So movement versus shift. Let's have a look at this. So movement along the demand curve. So again, demand curve, price, quantity demanded, is what happens when we change the price. So let's say the original price was here, okay, this level here. So we got this quantity demanded, and we got this point X on the curve. Now, when we got a movement along the demand curve, that means that price changes. So let's say the price increased, and now the quantity demanded increased. So you could see here, from here, we went up here. So you can see it's just a movement along the demand curve. The demand curve itself doesn't change. It's just the price, it's just this point X here going up and down depending on the price of the good. Okay, so that's what we call movement along the demand curve. Now we've also got the shift of the demand curve, where the entire curve is being shifted. So again, let's start off with this curve, and something happens that causes a shift. You can see the entire curve shifts from originally here, now it goes all the way here. And remember, and again, what happens when you shift the demand curve is that at every point in price, every price point that we have, there's a change in the quantity demanded for the entire thing. So when we talk about shift of the demand curve, we talk about the entire demand curve. All right. You could also have a shift to the left, shift to the right. Okay. I hope you saw that. Now, all right, let's now have a look at the common terminologies that we have when it comes to shifts in demand, okay? So the first shift that we have is when there is an increase in demand. So basically the curve shifts there, okay? And we saw this before with increasing Ellie's budget. So this is what we call an increase in demand. And I have to be very careful here when I say this. It's just a very pedantic point. And again, they usually are equivalent, but you have to be very careful with this. When we say an increase in demand, we mean an entire shift of the curve, all right? So that means a non-price factor happens that causes that shift in demand, that causes that change in demand. And that's what we call an increase in demand, okay? If it's just a movement along the demand curve, that's what we call change in quantity demanded, all right? Just to make that clear. So this is what we call an increase in demand. And we could also call that shift to the right, you know, the shift to the right. I think that's clearly. And you could also call it a shift up, because if you think of the demand curve this way, you could also think of it as going up. But that's very rarely used. We usually just say either increase in demand or shift to the right, more commonly. On the other hand, we could also have it be going the other way around. So we could have a decrease in demand. So we usually call this a decrease in demand, or a shift to the left. Because again, the demand curve shifts to the left. And we could also call this a shift down, but again, we don't really use that term much. These two terms are usually the most common one. So either say decrease in demand and shift to the left. So I'll be using these two terms interchangeably. Okay, and don't worry, we'll try to slowly get you into these terms, but I hope you appreciate the differences between the shift and the movement. Okay, now we get to the actual part where we look at what each non-price factor does and how that shifts the demand curve. Okay, so let's now have a look at income first. We've done this before, but I'll just reiterate this again, and there's a few caveats along the way. So again, so we'll be starting off every one of these analysis with the demand curve already drawn for us, and see what happens to the demand curve when we change certain factors. So let's start with income. So again, we've got Ellie with and the price of milk, and we've got Ellie's budget once again, and how much she can buy with that. So that originally, when she has 6 money, she could buy 3 bottles of milk. And if we increase that, which we've already seen, she increased the amount of milk she can buy, mainly because she has now more money to buy the milk. Okay, fair enough. So we've already discussed this. More income means we can buy milk, i.e. demand increases when incomes increase. So when incomes increase, the demand curve shifts to right, okay, or demand increases. I hope that's clear. On the other hand, if we decrease her budget, so from 6 now she has 4, she doesn't have that much money to buy as much milk as she used to. So now she has to buy less milk. And so what happens is the demand curve shifts to the left, or the demand decreases, right? So when incomes decrease, the demand curve shifts to the left, okay, or the income decreases. I hope that's clear enough. So shift to the left, demand decrease when incomes decrease. So, have a review of that. So, if incomes increase, demand increases. If incomes decrease, demands decrease. I hope this is very straightforward. It's quite common sense, to be honest. More money you have, the more stuff you could buy. So the more, if you got a choice, you probably buy more of a certain good if you got enough money, if you got more money for it, right? Straightforward enough. So there's what we call a direct relationship between income and demand. Direct means if one goes up, the other one goes up. If one goes down, the other one goes down. So that's what we call direct. However, this is just the usual bit. Okay, this is not always the case. There are some goods in life where it's not a direct relationship. Well, there are some goods in life where it's an inverse relationship, where the more income you have, the less you probably want of that good. What do I mean by that? Well, let's have an example. Consider public transport. Okay, so here's an example of a bus along the nice EDSA, um, along EDSA. Okay, and we've got this train here. This is in India. Um, so consider public transport. If a person has a lot more money, do you think they'd be more attracted to go to public transport, to use public transport? Think about it, right? The more money you have, right? If your income increased, let's say you've got a bit more money, you've got more time, you've got more money to spare, you probably will just go for an Uber or Grab, right? So that means the more income you have, you probably wouldn't want to go for this. Or even if you really have that much more money, you just buy a car and get rid of public transport in itself, right? So that means public transport is one of those things where we increase the income, decrease demand. Okay? So this is one of those counter examples where an increase in income doesn't necessarily mean an increase in demand. This is actually a very good counter example because if we increase the income, the demand decreases. Okay, because now there's other alternative choices that we could afford, and that's actually a lot more convenient for us, right? Imagine grabbing Uber or having your own car. You could actually go to where you want to be instead of being dropped off at a point and then you have to walk your way to where you need to go. So this is one of those counter examples. So increasing income leads to decreasing demand for public transport. So this is what we call an inferior good. Okay, so there are two types of goods that we'll see. So the first thing we've seen was like milk, where an increase in income leads to an increase in demand. That's called a normal good. And this one, like public transport, is called an inferior good. So what are other examples of inferior goods? So if there's an example of this is what we call generic goods, so supermarket brand goods. So this is, for example, one of the goods that we have here in Tesco's is basically a knockoff of Coke, basically. So most people wouldn't really buy this unless it's a lot cheaper, but it's not really the best. So if you have the more money, you'd probably just go for the Coke, right? Or instant noodles, right? They're not the healthiest thing. They do taste good, but if you got the money to spare, you'd probably just eat out or have a proper bowl of ramen, right? So there's one of those things where again, the more income you have, the less you'll probably consume of this. Okay, so again, the more income you have, the less you'll probably consume of this. And in terms of the demand curve, we say for an inferior good, when the income increases, the demand decreases. So what happens to the curve? That will shift to left. All right. And inversely, if we if we have less income, well, you'll probably have more demand for that because again, this is cheap. This is cheaper. You'll probably just go for that if you really want some sort of sustenance. And so, what will happen if your income decreases, you probably will consume more, which will push demand to go up, i.e., shift to the right. Okay, I hope that's clear enough. Move on. So here's a diagram from your notes that's already filled in, don't worry. So again, we've seen two types of goods. So we've seen inferior goods, so these are your public transport, your instant noodles, or any of that. Well, basically, the more money you have, the less you'll probably want of it. And the less money you have, because you don't really have much of a choice, you probably will consume more of it. So there's an inverse relationship between income and demand for an inferior good. And all the other goods that we have are called normal goods. I mean, that's quite straightforward. Well, there's a direct relationship. The more money I have, more demand I'll have for it. Okay, so that's a direct relationship. All right. So, not some notey bits. Again, feel free to fill out. So we got normal goods, which yeah, you just read that out. So goods for which an increase in income leads to an increase in demand, and vice versa. And you've got an inferior good where goods for which an increase in income leads to a decrease in demand, and vice versa. All right. So I hope that's very clear between the difference between these two types of goods. Okay, and income is the only one I think so far that we will be talking about that has this kind of distinction where you need to think about what kind of good do I have. All right, so that's for income. All right, let's have a look at complements. So a complement that we usually associate with milk is a cereal. Right? So here's some pictures of cereals. And of course, usually, right, we usually have cereal milk or not, or just in its own. But usually, when we think of cereal, when we think of bowl cereal, we usually have it with milk. So that's what we call a complement because they complement each other. They come together. Okay. So what happens if the price of cereal drops? So let's have a think of that. Okay. So we'll do this. What happens first? We'll do this through thinking about what happens first to cereal and then to cow's milk. Okay. I hope that's clear. So let's have a think. So again, we've got Ellie. And she now we've got cereal as well. So she usually buys a bowl of cereal, and cow's milk. Again, she let's say she buys two for this shopping trip. Imagine what happens if the price of cereal drops. So price of cereal goes down. So what do you think happens for the demand for cereal? Well, if you recall from last lecture, the law of demand, right? There's a decrease in the price of a good, your cereal. What happens to the demand of that good? It increases, right? So now from one cereal, she can now buy two because it's cheaper, so she could probably buy more. However, what happens to demand for milk? Well, she's got more cereal now, so she'll probably want to buy more milk, right? The cereal is usually taken with milk. So that means she'll probably get more milk, so she could have more stuff with her cereal. So now that means the demand for milk increases. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Right? So we decrease when the price of cereal decreases, the law of demand for cereal increases. And because we take cereal with milk, the demand for milk also increases. Okay? I hope that's clear. And the reverse also, if we do the reverse, so what happens when the price of cereal increases, the signs flip, okay? Because again, law of demand, price of cereal increases, therefore demand for cereal decreases. And because we take cereal with milk, you'll be less hesitant, you'll be a bit more hesitant to buy milk because you now have less cereal. Okay? I hope that's clear. So, in other words, when the price of cereal drops, when the price of a complement drops, the demand for milk increases. When the price increases for a complement, demand for the complementary good, which is milk. Sorry, when the price of a complement increases, like cereal, the demand for milk decreases. All right. Okay, let's have a look at this graphically. So again, here we go. Here's our demand curve, our original one. All right. So let's have a look first. If we decrease the price of cereal, the demand for milk increases. In other words, if we decrease the price of complements, by the way, this is general, we increase the demand for goods. So if this is the original demand for milk, if we decrease the price of a complement, that means the demand curve increases or shifts to the right. Okay, I hope that's clear. And inversely, if the price of cereal increases, the price of the complement increases, that means the demand for milk or the demand for the good more generally decreases. So what happens? If we increase the price of complements, decrease the demand, i.e. we shift the graph to left. Okay, I hope that's clear. Again, increase in demand, shift right, decrease in demand like this, shift to the left. Okay. Notes a bit. So again, a complement is just a good that is used together with another good. A decrease in the price of a good will increase the demand for both that good and its complements. Okay, I hope that was clear without case study. Again, law of demand, price. If the price decreases, you'll have more demand for that. and probably you'll also increase the demand for things that you take on with that. All right, I hope that's clear. Right, let's go to another thing, substitutes. All right, so the reason why I've always been stressing cow's milk is because there's other kinds of milk available, right? So this is a lovely photo of an almond grove in Shiraz, Iran. This is where almonds came from, and of course, one of the most popular variations of cow's milk is the almond milk, right? We also have soy milk. We also have coconut milk. So many other milks, all right? And these things can substitute for regular cow's milk, right? And the price of these things can have an effect on what happens to the demand for cow's milk. So that's a question that we're going to ask at this point in time. What happens when the price of these other types of milk changes? And again, we'll use the same approach. We'll look first on what happens to these milks first, and then what happens to our main good in question, which is cow's milk. So again, we've got LA, and then this time we've got almond milk and cow's milk. And I'll represent almond milk using, usually we've got cow's milk, and you say Ellie doesn't buy any almond milk. She just buys cow's milk, okay, usually. So let's have a look what happens when the price of almond milk changes. So again, almond milk can substitute for cow's milk. So if we decrease the price of almond milk, again, what happens to the demand for almond milk? Remember, law of demand, if we decrease the price, we increase the demand. There's an inverse relationship, right? And remember, now, so this time she buys, now she buys almond milk, right? Because cheaper, so she can probably afford it more, so demand will increase. However, you got to remember as well, I could use almond milk in place of cow's milk. So that means if I buy a jug of almond milk, I probably could go on not having another jug of cow's milk, right? So what happens to demand for cow's milk is that it decreases, right? So you can substitute it, right? So because you've got more almond milk, you could probably substitute that for one of your jugs of cow's milk. So now you demand less for it. And again, we can do the reverse. If we increase the price of a substitute, law of demand states that the demand for that substitute goes down. And again, because the demand goes down, that means I'll probably buy more of the good in question. Okay, so again, it's just the same, saying the exact same thing, except one is what happens when we increase the price, the other one is what happens when we decrease the price. And again, bring that together. If we decrease the price of an almond milk, which is a substitute for cow's milk, we decrease the demand for cow's milk. But if we increase the price of almond milk, we increase the demand for cow's milk, which is the okay. So again, let's look at this graphically. So here's our demand curve again. That's a blue line, our original demand curve. And we'll look first what happens when we decrease the price of a substitute. So we decrease the price of almond milk, which is a substitute, right? The substitute. And we saw from our analysis that the demand for cow's milk goes down. And again, if demand goes down, that means we shift to left. This is clear. Let's look at the inverse of that. If we increase the price of almond milk, if we increase the price of the substitute, we increase the demand for that good, for cow's milk, right? Now it's more expensive to buy almond milk, so people who used to buy almond milk might be tempted to just go for cow's milk because it might look relatively cheap. We've seen this in the substitution effect, by the way, just a reminder of that. So increase the price of substitute, we saw an increase in demand, which means shift to right. Okay. Substitute is a good that can be used in place of another good. A decrease in the price of the good will decrease the demand for its substitute. So we've seen that already. Okay. All right. So we're done with incomes. We're done with complements. We're done with substitutes, and now we get to what I would say is the easier bits. Okay, because there's less analysis. There's more common sense kind of thing. So taste and preferences. So taste and preferences is basically anything that can be triggered by media, new fads, etc. Okay. So for example, if there's a new article that comes out about how milk is so good for you, you'd probably want to buy more, right? or if there's a new fad, let's say milk baths becoming a thing, let's say that's become a huge thing. That's an increase. That's a taste, right? It's a new fad. So basically, that means people want to get more, right? Or so that's basically what we call taste and preferences. So what happens to the demand of a good if some new story happens to it, some new thing that that says this is good, so people want to get more. And again, it's all about narratives, okay? So taste and preferences are all about the stories we tell to each other. It doesn't matter if there's a huge study that's been done about how good milk is if that story doesn't come out to the public, right? It doesn't change the demand. What's important is what gets talked about, and that's what it is. So price and quantity demanded. So again, here's our old demand curve. If the news is good, then that means the demand increases, right? Because for example, like for this one, if people hear that that milk is such a good thing for you, people will probably buy more of it. So if the news is good, the demand curve shifts to the right, or demand increases. And inversely, again, if the news is bad, demand decreases, which is shifting to left. Clear enough? I hope so. Next, population. This is straightforward as well. So let's see how changes in the population size can affect the demand for milk. So again, we've got Ellie, and Ellie buys four jugs of cow's milk. However, if we add an extra friend, let's say Sarah, which you've met before, she buys two more again. So there's a total amount of milk bought, right? And if the more people we come in, let's say there's Michael, so he buys an extra jug of milk, even though he doesn't buy much. The addition of his presence means there's more milk that's being bought, right? Basically, more people means more milk being bought. Okay, so the more people, higher the population, the more people will buy, the more milk will be bought, right? Because that's what it is. So again, an old demand curve. If we increase the population, that means more things will be bought, and the demand curve shifts to the right. If the population decreases, however, the reverse happens. There will be less people to buy milk, therefore the demand for milk will decrease. Okay, simple enough. I hope so. And advertising. Okay, so ads, if made well, can affect demand too, and that's the whole purpose of adverts, right? It's make you buy more. So that's what it is. Okay, so if there's the ad is a positive thing, again the demand increases, we got to shift to the right. If the ad is negative, it's bad, we shift to the left. Okay, simple enough. And the last one is expectations. Now, normally this would be a bit hard to explain what we mean by expectation. So a lot of this is what we call speculation. However, I'm going to change subject now. We're not going to be talking about cow's milk. I'll be talking about something else that's a bit more relevant to, especially if you're listening to this in 2020. Right, so we'll be talking about toilet paper because remember that whole news about toilet paper? Everyone's going around screaming, trying to get toilet paper. Yeah. Why? It's because we're expecting there was a pandemic, right? So what happened? We're expecting toilet paper is gonna run out or something like that. Therefore, everyone just rushes to the store to buy toilet paper. And what happens? Oh yeah, toilet paper does run out. Okay, so you can see there's that expectation if something is going to run out or something is going to increase in price or we might not be able to get this, people will probably buy more. And this has been absolutely amazing. Just look at all the memes that have come out of this. Absolute gold, honestly. But yeah, so that's what it is. These are what we call expectations. So this is basically what we call speculation. Okay, it's what people think will happen in the future that drives the demand for that thing. And basically, this is how the stock market works. All right, a lot of trading that happens in the stock market is based on what I think the stocks will be in the future. Okay, if something good's gonna happen, then there's more demand for that stocks, and the price of that stock skyrockets, and that's basically how it works, at least partly. Okay, let's look at the curve again. So this is the original demand for toilet paper, and then when news of the pandemic happens, oh look, demand shoots up. All right, and this could also happen in the reverse. Let's say something happens. Let's say you're expecting the pandemic to end or something like that, or there's an expectation that toilet paper prices will go down. So of course, what you'll do, you'll wait for a bit. Okay. So here's a summary of everything that we've discussed. In your notes, so there's like I'm not going to call it an infographic because it's not, a table basically of what happens to the demand based on different circumstances, right? And non-price factors. Okay, so that's it. That's the summary for this. All right, so thank you for listening. So this is the last part for demand on that's the required bit. After this, which is part 4, I'll just be talking shortly about what happens, why are there sometimes when the law of demand seems to not be obeyed. Okay, so we'll be talking about a bit what happens. For example, why didn't I use mobile phones for the example that was in your textbook, but I chose not to do that. And you'll see why on part 4 if you want to have a listen to that. Okay, so again, that's completely optional, but if you are interested, I'd be more than happy to I'd appreciate you listening along. Okay, and then yeah, all right. If you need any more examples of this, and if I've got the time, I might make a part 5 video where I talk more about other cases, other case studies, and how that affects demand. Okay, but anyways, so thank you for listening. If you're willing to listen along, I'll see you in the next video, and if not, I'll see you in the next module. Thank you. And here are the image credits as required. Okay.